Hey guys, it's your favorite blonde Asian baker here, upgraded with a beret, and let's try that again, shall we? Welcome back to Momo, my channel and my kitchen. Today we are tackling one of the most frequently asked questions that I receive as a pastry chef, which is if I have a recipe for a dessert that is beautiful and visually striking, but also simple and achievable at home. I can tell you that the recipe doesn't actually matter. You can use any recipe. You can even use a box mix, very semi-homemade with chantilly. And that was what I did throughout the majority of college when I had only baking mixes at my disposal in the cafeteria. What does matter are 4 simple tips that we'll go over today as we apply them to this brown butter, salted caramel, and fig cake. And once you have these techniques in your arsenal, you can use them on any recipe to produce an efficiently impactful dessert. So let's get started. The first thing we need to do is to divide our cakes. Here I'm using a cake leveler which has a wire that you can set at a specific height. Make sure your cakes are cold as they'll slice more cleanly this way, and move the wire gently along until you get a nice even cut. So that's the inside of a beautiful cake. Something that I love about this recipe is that it makes super flat cake tops. So you barely need to even cut anything, which just eliminates the amount of trim that you have. Not that any of it actually goes to waste because I eat all of them, but less hassle. I'll put that there and then we'll continue on with the rest of these. A serrated knife can also be used for this step. It does take a bit more practice to get the cake layers as even, but that's honestly what I've been doing for years. So you'll notice that I'm stacking these layers as I cut them to reform the shapes of my cakes. And this is for a specific reason. The reason why I have stacked these is so that I can mock up the shape and the form of my cake. What's really important to me is the ratio of the sizes. So if the proportions of the smaller cake look correct and hopefully even elegant in relation to the size of the larger cake. And if not, then we can fiddle around with our decorations if we don't have time to bake other things or redo the recipe, etc. So this looks pretty good to me. Just for the sake of comparison, what will it look like if we add one more layer? This is actually kind of the height that I'm thinking it will eventually reach once we add the figs on top. So this still looks okay, but a little bit top heavy. Let's take that off. This is funky and short. What if we have 3 bottom layers and 3 top layers? This also is totally acceptable. I personally prefer longer lines. I think they look more elegant. That sounds like cake sizism. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it to come out that way. Just in general, in design aesthetic, longer lines tend to be more pleasing, and that is definitely true for cakes as well. So we'll stick with our 4 by 3 layers and we'll start assembling. I just buy these boards in bulk and I cut them out to my own sizes because I find it somewhat limiting when you order them in specific inches and then they're not always what you need. So I just get them in rectangles and I cut them out. Whether I have a rectangular, square, circular, trapezoidal, pentagonal, hexagonal, whatever kind of cake you're aiming to make, you'll always be ready for it. And then for this cream cheese icing, I do need to make a special note that because it is on the softer side, I don't like my cream cheese icing too sweet, so there's less powdered sugar in this recipe than most normal cream cheese frostings. So I work with it, particularly in the summer, semi-cold. It's still malleable, but the actual temperature in relation to my skin is cold. Now we're going to dab a little bit of frosting on the bottom here to stick that. And actually, I'm just gonna dab it onto my cake pedestal as well. This pedestal comes with a non-slip layer, but I recognize that not everyone has that. So what you can do in lieu of that is just to dab some icing on the bottom. We'll put this on our board, center it as best as you can, and then just go from there. You don't have to use a piping bag to distribute the icing in between the layers. You can totally use an offset spatula which is also something that I have done in the past. But the pip just makes the dispensing so much more even, and it goes faster this way as well. This uniformity isn't something that I was originally going to discuss as one of the tips or tricks, but it does remind me to bring up a good point. The uniformity of these layers, both of the cake and of the icing, are what contribute to something that's really stunning in the end. Now that we have filled our final layer for our bottom cake, I'm going to flip the top of this around just so that I can achieve a flatter result. I have not filled in between the layers with salted caramel because that's not the main flavor that I'm going for. I want the browned butter to speak for itself, which actually does have notes of salted caramel inside, but because salted caramel is such an overpowering flavor, especially with the cream cheese, which is strong as well, I just didn't want it to take over the brown butter note. But feel free to improvise, put in a layer of salted caramel if you desire. It is totally up to you. Also, feel free to use a stiffer buttercream. Next, we're going to crumb coat our cake by piping icing up the sides and on top. Use an offset spatula to spread it around the cake as evenly as possible. If you're anything like me and prefer using a cake board that is smaller in diameter than your actual cake, I highly recommend doing this step on a piece of parchment paper to preclude a giant mess and to help with easy transferring later. Then, using a bench or cake scraper, apply even pressure on the cake while spinning the turntable to create a smooth finish. Wipe any excess icing off the scraper after each pass. The amount of scraping that you do at this stage will determine how naked or clothed your cake is. This is also a very opportune time to straighten the sides of your cake and push back into place any cake layers that might have gone askew. Hold the scraper towards the bottom and just keep the pressure there, which helps push everything in. Once you're happy with the sides, use an offset spatula or bench scraper to remove the excess icing that has built up on the top during the scraping process. While I'm doing this, I'm just making sure that the thickness of the icing on the top is about as uniform as it can get. And now we have our finished crumb-coated base cake. And you can see, or maybe not, but in the close-ups you'll probably be able to see how there are literal crumbs in the icing. I'm not too bothered by that because that's just part of the look that I'm going for in this cake. If that bothers you, freeze this and then do another coat of icing the exact same way. That being said, it won't be quite as naked, it will just be a different look. While our cakes are freezing, we're going to prep the rest of our decor, which leads to my next two tips, one of which is more easily done than the other. Cast a discerning eye on whatever it is that you're working with, in this case, figs. What manipulation, if any, makes them look their best? Do you want to keep them whole, slice them in half, or quarters, slice longitudinally or laterally? Unfortunately, there is no easy shortcut to gain this skill of knowing what will look good. The best way to practice is to look at what inspires you, breaking it down into the specific elements that are pleasing before putting those elements back together again within the context of your own style. I personally draw a lot of inspiration from art. Fruit, particularly figs, always reminds me of still life paintings. I have a soft spot for the works of the little Dutch masters in this genre, with their slightly askance yet perfectly draped linens, luxury foods casually half-eaten and strewn about carelessly, a bunch of random crap hanging out on the table, and the occasional jarring skull, because there's nothing quite like remembering the fact that you will die to make you guzzle your champagne even faster and render your oysters and caviar even sweeter. Just kidding, that was definitely not the point of Juanitas. All of that is simply to say that the inspiration we take from these paintings will translate into using different sizes and cuts of figs that will be laid out in a very casual yet intentional arrangement, a la Dutch still life. Now the final tip is related to, but quite a bit easier to implement than its predecessor. Add some edible bling. If you've been following Shea Momo for any amount of time, you'll know that I am infatuated with gold, glitter, and anything that sparkles. You can achieve this glitzy effect by using gold leaf and or metallic powders, which are shown on screen. For the powders, you can either buff them on with a dry brush or mix them with an alcohol or extract to form a paint of sorts. The gilded effect on the figs here recalls the luxury of the subject matter found in Dutch still life and might even mimic the effect of a gold frame around a painting. I know that gold leaf and metallic powders are not the cheapest baking items to purchase, but I recommend investing in 1 or 2 quality products as their value will far outweigh their cost in the long run. Once you have all the shiny fruit that you need, it's time to warm up our salted caramel. Microwave it a few seconds at a time until it's loose again. I like to get a preview of how it will drip by letting it run down the side of the glass. This consistency here looks perfect, so now it's finally showtime. So I'll just grab my cake, and this is where the cake board is indispensable. Peel off my parchment there. And this is exactly like peeling off a Band-Aid. The faster you do this, the better. Got it. Make sure I know where the front is. Make sure that it matches with the front that I've chosen for this one. And even though we don't have a cake board on this little guy, he's frozen enough that he's firm on the bottom. I'm not too worried. Although, I will avail myself of an offset spatula. So we're just going to go from the back here. Try to center it really the best that we can. Just lay that on top. Now I'm just taking the salted caramel that we heated up earlier, and we're going to do a test strip, which is really important to see the consistency and texture of the caramel. So I have my piping bag here. I'm not going to use all of it in case we need to heat it up or cool it down further. On a part of the cake that is definitively the back, we're going to do a little drizzle. So let me flip this around so you can see. And something that I do to always make sure that I know the correct orientation of the cake is to either put a piece of tape where the front is, or I'll just use my hands as a guide. So here I know that the 12 o'clock is my front, so I'll put my other hand at the 6 and just do a little rotation. After you pipe your test strip, resist your innate urge to multitask and step away from the cake until the caramel stops running. I repeat, step away. Once you're happy and secure in your drip consistency, then and only then, move quickly and pipe the rest. Refrigerate after this step if necessary. Otherwise, continue with arranging figs and adding any finishing touches you may desire. Here we have some gold leaf because, you know me, I just couldn't help myself. So that concludes this cake tutorial masquerading as a pseudo-art historical lesson. Thank you so much for coming on this journey with me. I hope that illuminating my creative process has given you some helpful tools and techniques. Even though this particular cake may involve several steps, remember that you can use all of the tips we covered today to glow up any dessert. Please gently tap the thumbs up if you enjoyed this video or learned anything at all. And feel free to also tap that subscribe button if you'd like to help me reach my goal of 1,000 subscribers. I'll post all of the recipes used today in a separate video, so definitely check that out if you're interested in recreating this delicious cake. I 10 out of 10 recommend that you do. It was seriously one of the best that I've had in a very long time. As always, leave any questions or comments down below, and I'll see you in the next one. By the way, I am not wearing this wool beret during a 90-degree summer day in Los Angeles because I want to look like a hipster who eats at Wednesday-only pop-up falafel shops in Echo Park, nor am I channeling Kirsten Dunst's character in Elizabethtown. If you want to find out the real reason why, stay tuned for a fashion video coming up. See you then!